Hey, Bruce. Hey, Carrie. Let's see. It's just us on right now?
That's right. We've got a couple of attendees listening in
Okay,
from Reaching Higher. Welcome, folks. And that's us.
great.
And I'll let the other, Jordan, I'll turn this over to you to let Chris is there, let the other folks in.
Will do.
Okay, there's Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Hello. Oops, very light here.
Dave, I just sent you an email a few minutes ago. I don't know if you saw it.
I got it. Yep. Thanks.
Just
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. I'll mention that. Hey, Corinne.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Corinne.
Hey, Rick.
Rick.
So I think we have a few people that I think David Ryan, Barbara Tremblay, and Susan Heward aren't going to be able to make it.
Oh, okay.
And Iris, I know, is maybe going to be a little bit late. She had a conflict.
Okay. All right, great. How you doing, Val?
Very well, thank you. I don't think my microphone was working before. Can you hear me now?
No,
Okay, good.
it was all good.
Okay.
Can I ask a question or do I have to wait till we're in session?
No.
All right. So I was really glad I said Jordan sent an email to see if there was interest in a deliberation that was going to be like from 1 to 4:30. And I am always looking for a discussion time. And I think we do need some extended time for discussion, especially after reading so many items. You know, I mean, there's no one perfect plan. You know, and I really wanted to kind of pick Rick and Mel's brain on the last study that just finished in 2018, and can we move forward from that, you know, now that we have all of the surrounding history.
Right.
So just a comment, or, you know, look forward to hopefully having some, you know, extended discussion times on what direction to go in.
Yeah, I think that's the idea for that meeting. I think that's the end of July, 27.
Yes.
Yep.
And you know, almost to be sort of like a retreat style.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And Corinne and others, it turns out that at our next full commission meeting, which is next Monday, the 13th, we won't have any presenters. That's kind of not almost planned, but not quite. In any case, our next Monday, our 2-hour meeting will also be a time for us just to catch up with ourselves, reflect on some of the readings we've had. As Dave likes to say, we're on the back 9 now. And so we need to take stock and then anticipate our plans for the next few months.
Oh, good.
So
Thanks.
next Monday, no presenters, just deliberate discussion. And then on the 27th, we have 3.5 hours scheduled, 1 to 4:30. Those will be public meetings, of course. And so we'll have our, you know, folks will be able to listen in and make comments at the end as well. And we'll talk about public comments in a few minutes once we get started.
Yeah. And is there any thought of meeting face to face at some times in the near future or late future?
You know, that's a good question. We haven't even really talked about that yet. And yeah, it's probably something we need to talk about. And you know, maybe what I can do is sort of, even though we're an independent commission, you know, I do like to sort of get a little guidance from the, you know, Terry Paff and the legislature on what they want to do as far as, you know, protocols for, you know, for meetings right now. Because, you know, I don't think we want to put ourselves in a position where we make it harder for other committees and commissions to do stuff right. So, but yeah, I think that's a good idea to sort of talk. Bruce and Mel and Jay and I can talk about that and see, you know, see what others are doing on it.
Hey, Dave,
Yeah.
I had a talk with Jen 4 about that. I have another commission, which I'm chairing. That's the infrastructure, the one that's dealing with the $30 million. And
Yeah.
we're down to the fact we have about $88,000 left. But in order to have that used, we have to have a meeting, and then we have to take the recommendation to fiscal. And so I asked Jen, are they meeting at all? Is there any consideration whether we could have an eyeball to eyeball type meeting at the LOB? She said, well, just yesterday was the first day the staff on the 4th floor of the LOB were allowed to come back to work. And they're even doing that at part-time in, part-time out, so everybody's not there at once, so they can get the organizational work done in the building.
Mm-hmm.
So she said the building's not open to the public as this point, and that would be a problem that we would have. That any kind of a commission meeting, any kind of work session, it would have to be open to the public.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay, good
I
to know.
don't think it's in the cards for within the next several weeks.
Yeah. No, that's good input, Rick. Thanks. Was that for the safety and security grant?
Yes.
Okay. We extended that by another year, didn't we?
Yes, we did. But the issue is that we need to give the towns or the communities receiving this money time to use it. And anything that's left over, we've been reallocating to another school district. So there's
Right.
nothing left. So we are trying to get any kind of, well, we know it'd be 88 grand there right now. There may be more. But Amy Clark mentioned that to me yesterday also on the phone, that we'd like to get that into the hands of the users right now so they can get the projects done within this year's time.
Right. Okay, good. Well, hey, I think we're just a few minutes after 2 o'clock. I see Dr. Kenyon has joined us, so thank you very much for being with us today. Everybody's ready? I'll get this thing going, Bruce?
All set.
All right, so we'll call to order the meeting of the Commission to Study School Funding. Today's July 7th, 2020. And let's see, what we do per the governor's emergency order is begin our meetings with a roll call of members. And so I'll start that off here. Dave Luno reporting here in Hopkinton, New Hampshire. My wife actually has the day off today, so she's out and about the house along with our long-haired dachshund Ozzy. And so that's my report. Mel, are you there?
I am here. I'm Mel Myler. I'm here in Port Clyde, Maine by myself.
Okay. And Dick Ames?
Yes, I'm here in Jaffrey by myself.
Okay. And let's see, Rick Ladd.
Rick Ladd is here in Haverhill, New Hampshire with myself.
All right. And I think I saw Jay Kahn on the line. Yeah.
Present in Keene. No one else in the room.
Okay. And John Morgan?
Present. I'm in my home in Brentwood, and my one of my 3 little boys is napping in the room.
Okay, thanks, John. And Bill Ardinger looks like he's in a sunny spot.
Hello, hi, yes, I'm in Cuttyhunk, Mass here, and I've got a house full of family that may pass by here or there, so thanks.
Oh, thanks for being able to join us, Phil. That's great. I hope you guys are having a great time.
We are, it's beautiful.
And let's see, we've got Jane Bergeron.
Jane Bergeron here in Litchfield, home alone with the Black Lab Otis.
Okay, thanks. And Corinne Cascadden.
I'm here in Berlin, New Hampshire, at home alone.
Okay, thanks, Corinne. And let's see, David Ryan indicated that he wasn't going to be able to make the meeting. John Beardmore.
Hello, I'm here in Hopkinton by myself in the room, but the rest of my family is kicking around the house.
Okay, thanks, John. And let's see, is Iris Estabrook suggested she was going to be a little late. I don't see her on yet, so she may be joining us in progress. Let's see, Barbara Tremblay also indicated that she wasn't going to be able to make it today. Christine Dwyer.
Yes, I'm here in Portsmouth in my office.
Great, thanks, Chris. And let's see, Susan Huard indicated she wasn't going to be able to make it, and I don't see her on this afternoon. And Val Zanchuk.
Val Zanchuk is home alone in Concord.
All right, thanks, Val. And let's see, Mary's right there.
Hi, I'm here, Mary Heath, here in Manchester, and I am home alone.
Great, thanks, thanks, Mary. And let's see, we've got we've got Jen 4 here with us.
Hi, Jen 4 calling in from Concord. I'm home alone as well.
Okay, great. And let's see, we've got Bruce Mallory.
Yeah, Bruce Mallory, Kittery Point in my office. Did we get, Dave, did you call Dick earlier? I may have missed that. Dick Ames.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I did.
Oh, sure.
So, and let's see, we've got Michelle Holt Shannon with us.
Hi, Michelle Holt Shannon in Dover. My daughter Olivia and my dog Archie and my dog Pluto are rattling around the house somewhere.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michelle. And we've got Carrie Potry.
Hi, my name is Carrie Portree, and I am in Dover, New Hampshire, and my husband's in the other room.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And Jordan is joining us from Seattle again.
It's Mount Hood, just outside of Portland, Oregon.
I mean, Portland, Oregon, I mean, yeah.
But yes, I am. I'm here in Dover, and you can see sometimes my dog is joining us.
Great, great. Thanks, Jordan. And let's see, and we've got our guest speaker today, Dr. Daphne Kenyon. So Daphne, welcome, and welcome to this sort of crazy remote meeting style.
Thank you.
Daphne, before you start, we'll also note that Drew Atchinson's here. I don't believe we.
Oh, that's yeah. And Drew Atchison from AIR is here.
Okay.
Hi, Drew.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. So I don't think I missed anybody. And let's see. Before we get started, Jordan, how are we looking as far as open access?
Looking good. We've got 16 public folks on the call and have not received any questions about access, so I think we're good.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see. Before we get started, I wanted to just take a moment to talk a little bit about public comment. So I think, as most people know, we had suspended public comment when we went from live in-person meetings to remote meetings. And I think during the sort of the formative stages of remote meetings, you know, public comment was a challenging type of thing for some public meetings. And I think we sort of wanted to wait till things settled down a little bit. We opened it up last week. I think it went very well. So we'll be continuing that on our commission meetings, and we'll do it basically the last 15-20 minutes of the meeting so that, you know, members of the public can let us know what's on their minds, what's important to members of the public, certainly very important to us. And so it's important to have your thoughts on that. So, so we appreciate that. And we've also had a little bit of discussion about how can we maybe provide maybe greater opportunity for public comment in a way that doesn't you know, sort of make it more difficult to get through a public agenda. And so I think what we've decided on is to once a month have a meeting scheduled for an hour or so in the afternoon, and it's, you know, it can be everybody on the commission. It could be you know the executive team on it. Certainly the more the merrier, but we certainly understand people's schedules sometimes don't allow making every meeting, but basically provide the public, you know, an open mic to let us know what their thoughts are, what they're hearing from commission meetings and work groups, and provide feedback that way. So so that'll be one way to do it. Of course, we've always got you can always email feedback to schoolfunding.commission@unh.edu. And I think sometimes people have posted comments using the Q&A feature on the Zoom webinars. We're not using it for Q&A, but we can capture comments there and get those comments out to the committee members. So hopefully all of those things will help to increase opportunities for public comment. Mel, you have anything you want to add on that, since you're chairing the public engagement?
No, I think you covered it, David. I think we've got a lot of activity planned for the summer. I won't give the report. You don't want me to give the report now?
No.
Okay, no, that's fine.
But certainly there'll be a lot of, you know, public engagement is a big part of this this effort. So any way we can improve that, we're going to look to do that. So let's see. Before we get started, actually, Bruce, do you want to just run through group agreements very briefly?
Sure, it's always good to remind, and I'll add to your comments about the public engagement period. We'll be posting these opportunities for, as Dave says, an open mic. There'll be 1-hour sessions on Wednesday, July 15th, again on August 12th, and then we'll go to a bi-weekly schedule every other Wednesday, starting on September 9th. All of that will be posted on the commission website and on the general court calendar. These will be opportunities for people to make statements based on what they've heard in commission meetings or read in terms of our materials. There won't be opportunities really for give and take, for Q&A or deliberation, but there will be another opportunity for the public to let its views known to the commission as we move through our work. So more information, more details on the commission website will be posted very shortly. In terms of our group agreements, just a quick reminder. That's the wrong screen right there.
No, I think you got it.
You got it, okay. That is, in all of our conversations with each other, we're going to keep an open mind. This is a terribly multi-layered and complicated topic, and some of us come into this with preconceived ideas, and the idea here is to educate each other by staying open-minded. Listen first. It's okay to disagree, but don't personalize it. Focus on the idea, not the person. If you disagree, consider asking a question rather than arguing to prove your point. We're inevitably will encounter some conflict among our points of view, and so we'll accept working through conflict to its resolution as a way to share our learning. It's okay to put issues like race and class on the table. Be purposeful and to the point. Notice if what you're conveying is or is not pertinent to the topic at hand. Take risks, try out ideas, be raggedy, make some mistakes as we go through this, and then let go. And we all share responsibility for making the group productive. So always good to keep those in mind. This commission has really operated in a very collegial and deliberative fashion, respectful fashion. And so this, I think, is setting a good example for what public governance can be about. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. And then I guess the last sort of housekeeping piece we want to get through is I know it's been a couple weeks since we met because of the legislative work last week, and but right following our meeting on June 22nd, there were a set of minutes that got sent out. I don't know if everybody got a chance to give them a quick look-see, but if we're close, I would certainly take a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
So there's been a motion to approve the minutes. Is it seconded?
Mary Heath will second.
All right, terrific, Mary. Thanks very much. We do need to do a quick roll call to do this. Any changes, corrections, deletions, amendments, amplifications? Then without that, we'll just go through the roll and so Mel Myler.
Yes.
Dick Ames.
Yes.
Rick Ladd.
Yes.
Jay Kahn.
Yes.
John Morgan.
Yes.
Bill Ardinger.
Yes.
Jane Bergeron.
Yes.
Corinne Cascadin.
Yes.
John Beardmore.
Yep.
Chris Dwyer.
Yes.
Val Zanchuk.
Yes.
Mary Heath.
Yes.
Did I miss anybody? I think we're good. So the minutes carry. So good. Thanks for that. And joining us today, as previously mentioned, Dr. Daphne Kenyon from the Lincoln Institute, and really so delighted you can join us today, and really looking forward to hearing about the work you've done in the property taxation and the effects that has. Bruce, anything? I know there's a lot to add there, but.
No, I think a lot of us were aware that Dr. Kenyon has been taking a look at how property taxes are used to fund public schools in New Hampshire and in the region and nationally for several years. And we're fortunate to have her with us today as she reminds us of those initial findings and then updates us on some more contemporary work that she and her colleagues have been doing at the Lincoln Institute. And I think this provides a larger context around tax policy and specifically property tax policy. Beyond that, Daphne, I'll let you, introduce yourself to the group. And again, thanks very much. If you need any help in terms of slides or sharing slides, let us know. But I think you're all set.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm an economist, and I've been working on school funding and property tax for some years now. This comes at an opportune time for me because we're working on a second edition of a report. Before I start sharing slides, I always like to say a couple things about the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, because some of you may not have heard of it before. It's important to note that we're nonpartisan. We're a private operating foundation whose roots date back to 1946. And our mission is to improve quality of life through the effective use, taxation, and stewardship of land. So I think I'm going to try the slide share here. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think, Bruce, you might have to make me a co-host so I can show my slides.
Jordan's doing that right now.
Okay, super. Then I'll try it again in a minute, but just to give you a little preamble, I was originally hired at the Lincoln Institute in 2005 to write a report, a policy report on how the property tax connects with school funding. And that report was published in 2007. It's been very popular. And so the editorial board of the Lincoln Institute approved a second edition of the report. And so far we have parts written. We're aiming for a full first draft the end of September. Aha, okay. This is the 2007 report, but for the second edition, I now have 3 co-authors, one of whom is Alana Shute, who's listening as part of the audience. And what the report consists of is a mammoth literature review and then certain case studies. So we try for policymakers to digest and read all kinds of academic articles that you wouldn't want to read and make sense of them, collect lots of data, and write a report in maybe 50 pages, along with there will be a policy brief as well. So you can see here that case studies are at the heart of the report. Some states we did in 2007, we'll have different ones in 2020, but importantly for you, New Hampshire was a case study state for the original report, and we are also doing a case study of New Hampshire for this report. So to start off, as of this morning, taking another look at the draft case, what makes New Hampshire distinctive? What is really distinctive about New Hampshire compared to the other 50 states? I'll go through some evidence in a bit. But right now, it seems like there are 3 key things. New Hampshire is the #1 state in the country in terms of property tax reliance. New Hampshire, like a couple other states, Michigan, enacted a state education property tax to fund its restructured school finance system. So it's somewhat unusual, but not unique. And New Hampshire has very prescriptive state Supreme Court school finance rulings. So let me go to the evidence. And before I get too much further, just say that the reward for a speaker is getting a couple good questions. So I hope I'll get a couple questions at the end. So we have a website called State by State Property Tax at a Glance that describes in 4 pages of narrative how the property tax works in each state and then presents statistics related to them. So this is what's on our website right now for New Hampshire. And we compare New Hampshire to the US average, and then we rank New Hampshire relative to other states and the District of Columbia. That's why the rank is out of 51. So you could see for per capita property tax, New Hampshire is high, ranks 3rd. For property tax as a percent of personal income, which is an alternate measure of property tax burden, New Hampshire is at 5.5%, with the US average at just over 3%. So here, New Hampshire ranks 1st. Then the 3rd line shows property tax as a percent of state local revenue. Here, New Hampshire ranks 1st, the state most dependent on the property tax in the entire United States, and this has been constant for a while. And then the last line shows the estimated effective property tax rate for a median owner-occupied home. So homeowners can relate to this. So the US average property tax on home is a little over 1%, but in New Hampshire, it's double. This next slide is from the 2007 report, but I think this finding still stands. And the title says state Supreme Court rulings range widely, which they do. But also this from purple to yellow to orange, from left to right, we have different case study states that go from the least restrictive state Supreme Court rulings to more and more restrictive. So in Michigan, the Supreme Court upheld the state's school finance system. The court didn't make the state do anything. In Ohio, the Supreme Court found the system unconstitutional but didn't enforce it. Massachusetts, which has really identical language in its constitution with respect to school funding and finances of schools, the Supreme Court in Massachusetts found the system unconstitutional but mandated no specific remedy. So you go further to the right, and you could see that we rated New Hampshire and New Jersey as very restrictive. The Supreme Court found the system unconstitutional and imposed a number of specific mandates. So when the court says that the state must define an adequate education, determine its cost, fund it with constitutional taxes, and ensure its delivery through accountability, those are all very specific requirements that can be tricky. Now, I'm going to talk about the policy recommendations in 2007. And before you think, oh, who cares? I have to say that we're likely to reaffirm these same recommendations in 2020. Our next meeting of the author group is in a week and a half, and we're going to discuss recommendations, always tricky to do. So we're likely to reaffirm these, but also add some others. So our first recommendation was target property tax relief to needy taxpayers through state-funded property tax circuit breakers. And you may think, well, is this part of your mandate? But I understand property taxes have become part of the conversation for your gubernatorial race. And I think most New Hampshire people are interested in property taxes. So I'll have a little bit on this. Our second recommendation is to target school aid to needy school districts, schools, and students. And implicit in the state aid chapter of the 2007 report is a little more detail about what is meant by targeted school aid. And the first component is to employ a foundation type formula. And, you know, we didn't just create this, you know, John Yinger and other textbooks and studies have promoted a foundation type formula. And a foundation formula basically fills the gap between the amount of funding that a district can provide with a certain tax rate and the stated foundation amount. So it's a system that tops up. The second component of recommended aid is to adjust for differences in education costs. So there's two kinds of differences. One has to do with the cost of educating students. And we maintain that someone who's an English language learner would require more resources to educate to a certain level than someone whose first language is English. And so adjusting for this difference in education costs can be done by weighted pupils. So maybe the English language learner would be counted as 2 compared to the student whose first language is English. And here, to adjust for differences in costs, it's not just sufficient to have weighted pupils or categorical aid, but it has to be enough funding, and a high enough weight. Then the other component of education costs is differences in cost of living. And I have to imagine that cost of living in Coos County has got to be less than Rockingham. And so to make it fair, you would adjust for that. Then the final component on the school aid recommendations is to take into account differences in fiscal capacity. And so many formulas might just look at differences in property tax base per pupil. But some other states use a broader measure of fiscal capacity that take income into account as well. And here I have to tell you that I'm in favor of both income and property wealth as how to measure fiscal capacity. But Andrew Rashofsky, who's one of the co-authors, he seems to be leaning towards just counting property tax wealth. So in the whole process of writing and having a report reviewed and so forth, this, will have to be worked out. So how does New Hampshire rate according to these policy recommendations that are likely to be reaffirmed in this report that's forthcoming? Let me begin with the circuit breakers and first explain what they are, and New Hampshire has one. And how good does it work? So property tax circuit breakers prevent taxpayers from being overburdened by property taxes. The precise definition is that they provide households with direct property tax relief that increases as household income declines for a given property tax bill. And the simplest kind of circuit breaker, a classic circuit breaker like Massachusetts had, I didn't check the current percent, but for a long time, Massachusetts said people should not pay more than 10% of their income in property taxes. So once you get up to 10%, we're going to write you a check through the state income tax. But other states have said 4%. You can choose that percent, but that's the simplest circuit breaker. And in our current era of fiscal stringency, if not fiscal, crisis, it's even more important when you're talking about property tax relief to reduce the cost of providing that. So part of why authors at the Lincoln Institute are so keen on circuit breakers is that you can target the property tax relief and not spend as much money. Okay, and the last thing, the last bullet here talks about those who are housing rich and income poor. Someone who has a decent house, who's out of work, gets hardly any income, right away, they would be eligible for the circuit breaker, because you'd say, what percent of your income are you paying in property tax? If your income's near zero, you're at the head of the line. Now, New Hampshire does have a circuit breaker. It's not called circuit breaker, but it's the low and moderate income homeowners property tax relief program. It only applies to the education property tax. And you can look at the income limits, for a married couple, we didn't put the single down here, but just for a married couple with income less than $25,000, they get 100% refund. But as income goes up, the percent refund declines. And a claim has to be made and postmarked between May 1 and June 30, following the due date of the final property tax bill. So unlike in Massachusetts, where there's a personal income tax and you can take care of it through the income tax, through New Hampshire, there has to be an application. So now that I've explained what a circuit breaker is, how New Hampshire's work, what are the pros and cons of New Hampshire's circuit breaker? Well, a big plus, New Hampshire has a circuit breaker. Not all states do. And in 2018, the state gave almost 7,000 households a total of $1 million in property tax relief. Great. But what's the downside? What's weak about New Hampshire's property tax? It only applies to the state education tax. New Hampshire homeowners pay they pay property taxes for local education, for local services, so they don't get any relief there. The window to apply is pretty short. You could miss it. In Massachusetts, if you miss it, you can apply retrospectively. You get 3 years of refund at once if you didn't know that you were eligible. Not so in New Hampshire. The income limit is low. And as this chart shows, this is a mystery that Alana Shute just dug up when she was helping me with slides. How is it that from 2003 to 2018, according to the New Hampshire Department of Revenue, fewer and fewer people have been getting this relief year by year. If you have any clues, let me know. So that's the circuit breaker recommendation. What about the way that state aid is structured in New Hampshire? What about the question, do New Hampshire students receive an adequate education? Well, in the old report and in the forthcoming report, in both of these, we look at test scores from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And this is a very commonly cited measure of performance. It's widely known as the nation's report card. In 2001, in the No Child Left Behind Act, it was mandated that every state participate in the NAEP in reading and math for grades 4 through 8 every 2 years. So if you look at the ranks here, you see this is good news for New Hampshire. New Hampshire ranks 4th, 5th, 3rd, and 2nd in the country in terms of the percent of students scoring at or above basic. Looks very good. Not as good as Massachusetts for 3 of those lines, but way, 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 way better than California. Now, Andrew Wachowski drafted the chapter on state aid formulas, and he identified 5 sources, 5 mammoth studies that look at how good a state's school funding system is. And you have the citations and the links that I sent you earlier. And so this is a very rich slide that requires a little bit of explanation. So some of these studies rank states on adequacy of spending. They all rate states' school finance systems on equity of school aid. You can see on adequacy of spending, New Hampshire looks good, above average, A, rank of 15 in the nation, looks good. But on equity of school aid, a whole different picture. And let's right now focus on the first row, the Albert Shanker Rutgers University study, where it says school aid is regressive. First, I'll define in general what that means, and then I'll give some specific numbers that will hit home more. So as the note says, regressivity is generally defined as lower levels of per pupil spending in school districts with larger share of low-income students. Really not what you want. And in the Albert Shanker study, they have per pupil spending in high poverty districts compared to low poverty districts. And the study was published in 2020, but it uses data from 2017. And in New Hampshire, they say per pupil spending in low poverty districts was a little over $16,000. Per pupil spending for high poverty districts was $13,556, just the opposite of what you want. The Shanker-Rutgers study looked at Massachusetts too. Massachusetts is rated as progressive. The per pupil funding for low poverty districts was $16,000. For high poverty districts, $17,639. You know, more sensible. So at this point, like I said, our next meeting, we're talking about policy recommendations, and we're, you know, probably going to reaffirm the ones that we had from before. One that I didn't put on the slide, but it occurred to me later, is that we're likely going to have some kind of recommendation that says that a good school funding system creates an appropriate link between state aid and property tax. that property tax gives you local control. It gives you stability. But with the property tax, you end up with fiscal disparities. So state aid helps out on that. So if you have the two working together, you have the best provision of K through 12, the best financing system for K through 12 education, but they have to work together. Now, you know, in the time that we're in right now, things are changing. Two challenges for our policy recommendations are, what about this coronavirus recession? And can we look back to the Great Recession to get some lessons there? Well, right now, everyone's predicting large budget gaps for state governments. I follow Moody's economic forecasts, and there was a report in May that said the average state will see about 1/5 of its budget disappear by the end of fiscal 2021. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, they do reports and they're projecting, you know, a big deficit for New Hampshire. Well, what happens when states have deficits? They cut aid for education. In the last recession, most states cut aid for education. So I think for us, we're going to make a recommendation. How should aid be cut? What's the best way to cut it? And I think our recommendation will be to try to have targeted cuts, not across the board cuts, but to cut the most in places that have the most, so that you don't increase disparities in education. The other item that we're mulling about is, you know, what about the turn to remote learning? How important is that? Is that a one-time thing, or is that going to be a new set point? Is there going to be a move more to more blended learning from here on in? I know New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire University with Paul LeBlanc, you know, they lead the country in a model for online learning for college. You know, would New Hampshire, you know, change for more blended learning for K through 12? Hard to say. If that is the case, then you might have to think, wow, how do you provide and fund an adequate education if you have more remote learning or blended learning? What does that mean for your job? You know, I have more sources that could be helpful. For the Lincoln Institute, the last source here is a series of short webinars, the Property Tax School Funding Connection. And if you felt like it, you could hear about like Texas case study. Texas does not have a personal income tax. They have had school funding for, you know, cases for a really long time, and they have wrestled with the same thing that New Hampshire wrestles with. And they thought they had it fixed in the 2019 legislative session, but of course with the recession, who knows? And then these are these 5 studies that grade state government school funding systems. And I would urge you to, you know, look at some of them. You know, I think it gives a different view. So with that, you know, I'm done with my prepared remarks. But like I said, the reward for any speaker is to get a couple questions. I'm going to try to stop sharing here.
Thanks so much, Dr. Kenny. And I'm sure there will be plenty of questions from this group. They never disappoint.
Okay.
So I'll open up the floor. Rick, it looked like you had a hand up there.
Well, I do have a question. I'd like to go back to her slide dealing with New Hampshire circuit breaker, the cons, and where we're seeing the number of applicants or claimants going down. Is this, and then we also see the revenues coming, you know, that are doled out as also really shrinking. So is this a result possibly that the statewide education property tax is collected locally and the dollars remain local? And whose responsibility is to issue this tax, relief? Is it the state or is it the local community who may not be doing it?
Right. Well, I have to say, I credit Alana Shute with finding this. And to me, this is a big mystery why this has gone down. It could have to do with the changing amount of the statewide property tax. But, I suspect, given that the window of application, the application window is so short, I suspect that there are probably a lot of people in New Hampshire that do not know that they could be eligible. And just an additional piece of information of some interest, a few years ago, the Lincoln Institute was approached by AARP. You might be familiar that they help seniors fill out their income taxes. Well, in some states, they've been helping seniors with property tax rebates as well. And they were helping seniors in New Hampshire with these rebates. So, seeing this table of the declining claims granted and the declining total relief paid makes me think I should check back with our friends at AARP and see if they know what's going on. Because one consistent issue with property tax relief is that sometimes there are people who don't know they're eligible and don't get it. And, especially in a state that relies so heavily on property taxes, this is...
My concern, may I, Dave, and just to follow up, is that now that the money is being collected not by the state effective 2011, that changed. And now it's the local. Right. Is the local now given the task, the responsibility to notify their public in a timely manner that they have this opportunity, have this circuit breaker? And are they doing that? I would question if it's local. I've sat on many a select board here and I know that we don't do it. Now, is the state doing it? Is the state doing the community that there is this circuit breaker?
Do you have an answer on that, John?
Yeah,
and Bill, I know you have your hand up too, but
I can provide a little bit of insight on this. I did work at the Department of Revenue for 4 years. The program is, as Dr. Kenyon explained, is a rebate from the state to the taxpayer. Let's use 2020 as an example, because I think we're just out of the window now. So DRA is going to give checks to local taxpayers for state education property taxes that they paid last year. So you pay your tax bill in most towns in July and December, and in the next calendar year, you can be rebated on that schedule that was on the presentation by the state. So taxpayer applies to the state, and the state cuts the taxpayer a check. In my opinion, it's got nothing to do with where the tax was originally collected or the donor town issue, Representative Ladd, which you recall changed in 2011. But as Dr. Kenyon noted, every year DRA pays out less and less. If you look at that schedule, it declined precipitously when the rate went down to an amount sufficient to raise 363 million. So all things being equal, if there's, the amount levied hasn't changed, the income brackets haven't changed, we might expect a natural decline because maybe there's fewer people today who own a home and earn $25,000 than there were 15 years ago who own a home and earn $25,000. That's sort of the only logical conclusion I can make. If you also just sort of think about marketing the program, as you said, Representative Ladd, kind of whose job is it to get the word out there. I recall that DRA did annually mail flyers, which is kind of old school by today's standards, to town clerks' offices. And I've recalled seeing them posted, when you walk in to register your car and you see a flyer for hunting and fishing licenses, and you see a flyer for property tax relief, that those were sent out. But certainly in my time there, Revenue did not aggressively market the availability of that program. I also suspect that over time, you have people who apply for it every year. I recall there were individuals who had their application in on day one religiously, would call a week before and make sure it was still available. As those folks grow old and age out of their homes, they're not applying, and we're not doing a good job of marketing the program as the broad we. So that might have something to do with it. I did bring up this program a few meetings ago and suggested that might be a pot of money as we talk about how to differently allocate state dollars. We ought to just be aware that that program exists, and this meeting's doing a good job of sort of raising that issue. And as Dr. Kenyon might be able to further explain, there's sort of other ways to have a circuit breaker. Ours is pretty ungenerous. You only get rebated the state education property tax portion, not the local. The state could expand what qualifies, it could increase the income limits, it could, it could do a lot of things to change the current program to make it more generous and available, but the state could also do a homestead credit, or, there's other ways to approach trying to make our state property tax system more progressive than it is.
Right. Dr. Kenyon, do you have more to add on that?
Well, see, a homestead credit, typically, the negative thing about a homestead credit is it goes to everybody. You get someone who, makes $200,000 a year, they would still get the credit. But then the positive side of a homestead credit is that, since it goes to everybody, you have less of an issue with marketing. It's just automatic. So, I remember having a debate with a property tax expert about which is better, the circuit breaker or a homestead credit. And, perhaps since I lived in New Hampshire for so long, I became frugal like the typical New Hampshire person. And I feel like you should spend your money very carefully. So I'm still think the circuit breaker is better than a homestead credit.
But I think the comparison to Massachusetts illustrates that circuit breaker is a little more cumbersome maybe to administer in New Hampshire because you don't have some other tax liability like an income tax.
Right.
We're supposed to talk about to credit against. It's just an efficient tool that Massachusetts has that we don't have.
Yeah.
Are there, and just while we're on this thread here, are there ways to, I guess, measure the, and I'll use one of my new terms that I've learned during this project, the horizontal tax equity within a community?
Yes. And I have to say that New Hampshire's property tax works pretty well. And off the top of my head, I can think of probably about 30 other states where horizontal equity of the property tax is much worse than New Hampshire. Since Prop 13, which I'm sure you've heard about, there has been a spread across much of the United States to have these things called assessment limits, where the assessment of your property can't go up by more than a certain percent per year. And once you do that, like in California, they'll have two houses next to each other with the same market value, and one, the property tax would be four times that of the neighbor, right? So I'd have to review it, but I think during New Hampshire's long series of school funding lawsuits, there was one that was called Sorrel. I forget the year, but New Hampshire, even though it was in the Constitution that New Hampshire communities were supposed to do a revaluation every 5 years, communities didn't do it. But after that lawsuit, they kind of pulled up their socks. And, you know, so I tend to use New Hampshire as the example of a well-functioning property tax that is not plagued by horizontal inequity. You know, the weaknesses of New Hampshire's tax system is you are the #1 state in the whole country for reliance. So for any tax, if you rely on it too much, then the weaknesses become more evident, right? But the property tax in New Hampshire is transparent. You know, I lived there and, you know, participated in my, my local budget. And if they were discussing having a new track at the high school, you know, voters were informed. You could find out, oh, if it's a track and my house is worth $150,000, this is how much I will pay. You know, properties are valued close to 100% of market value. Many things work well.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Daphne. Are there, Jay, is this on this thread?
Well,
no, only because Bill's had his hand up for a little bit, but I wanted to just while we're on the thread that
I'm not on horizontal tax equity.
You're on horizontal tax equity?
No.
No. All right. Anything else while we're on this one? Bill, it's yours.
Thank you. And Dr. Kenya and Daphne, thank you so much for presenting to the commission. And I wanted to ask you a question about your slide, grading New Hampshire. Is there a way you could share that slide?
Oh, well, I sent a PDF of all of my slides to all of
Very good.
Yeah.
I'll refer to it then in my question. I've got it on my screen, my PDF. On your slide, there were two columns: adequacy of spending, and then equity of school aid.
Right.
Adequacy of spending seems to me, and if you would clarify it, to be about what is the total amount spent in a district on a per pupil basis. For example, in New Hampshire, the average spending per pupil we found is about $19,000 per pupil, which ranks New Hampshire very highly. Is it that, and that's, that 19,000 is obviously different across the state. That's an average, and it's funded by both local property taxes and by state aid and federal aid. So I just wanted to clarify, is your adequacy of spending column, is it that total column number that is being graded? The total spending number?
Oh, the total spending. Yeah, it's definitely the total spending. But one thing I should tell you is that this particular slide, to do this slide, I went to my colleague Andy Wachowski's draft chapter on school aid. And then I, went into the particular studies to pull out what they said about New Hampshire, but I didn't write that chapter. So after we talk today, I'm going to send this to him, and this is all draft and so forth, but you have the links to these 5 studies. And
I read them, and they're very helpful. I note that in the equity of school aid column, New Hampshire is rated much lower with an F and poor. And And do you think that could be due to the fact that under New Hampshire's current state aid formula, 80% of the aid is distributed across the state to every community at a rate of $3,709 per pupil, with no variation for poverty, with no variation for English language learners. The largest part of our adequacy, quote unquote, foundation amount is out on a per pupil flat grant basis. Is that what's contributing to that F grade inequity?
Yeah, I would think that is extremely likely. And see, to me, that it doesn't make sense because, as I said, our last report and other reports recommend a foundation system. So under a foundation aid system, every community does what it can with its property tax base, and then the state comes in and tops up. So the example I use in the report is I have a foundation amount that's $6,000 per pupil. This is just all hypothetical. A poor town at the standard tax rate can come up with $1,000. So the state comes in and gives them an extra $5,000. But a fairly well-off town using the same standard tax rate comes up with $5,000. So the state just gives them $1,000 to top it up. And to me, and to many experts, that is a sensible way to do a school finance system.
I personally, as my commission members know, strongly agree with you on that. One last question, Dave, if I might.
Go ahead.
Daphne, you mentioned that in looking at the upcoming fiscal crisis, and I've been helping some folks, budget director in the governor's office, for example, come up with revenue estimates, which for the state. And when you face an era where there may be cuts, that it's important to look at equity in those cuts so that the communities who are most in need, they should receive less, and an equitable formula, less cut on a per pupil basis than communities that have very robust income, fiscal capacity, and maybe less need. And I think it's interesting, Drew Atchison, who's on the phone from AIR, I came across a study that Drew just published, or a PowerPoint, about the city of New York. I was working on something with that and was very impressed, Drew, to see you actually calculating the difference in the governor's proposal to the legislative proposal in New York and the impact on New York city school system. So Daphne, that's a very good point that you raised on looking at, because our legislators on this committee are going to have to deal with cuts in the upcoming budget cycles.
Yeah, and we want to have our recommendations be timely and useful. And just to add one more thing to your point, a community that's pretty well off, where most people are able to work from home and they're not unemployed, if the state cuts school aid, as most states will during this very severe recession, if they wanted to, they could increase property taxes and hold themselves harmless, right? But a different community where people are unemployed, if state aid is cut, they might even cut property tax. So whatever disparities you have in New Hampshire with a tough time that we're going through and likely cuts in state aid, if those cuts in state aid are across the board, disparities are just going to increase. And that's what at least one research study found with the Great Recession, that the recession increased disparities in educational funding and opportunity.
I really appreciate your work. Daphne, it's great to see you again.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
Let's see, Jay, you had a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think this last point is really significant, that we have an opportunity to look at not only how do we fund up to solve disparities, but how do we reduce funding and achieve more equity in the state's funding formula? I think that is a much more likely scenario for us to achieve some of the goals that we're looking for, even though we always think the pot's got to grow in order to do this. So I'm glad you surfaced the thought. I think it's really key and timely, and we've got to adjust our recommendations to the timeliness and the situation that the legislature is going to find itself. Otherwise, we've got a report that's just on a shelf. So there were two data points that I thought were particularly interesting. And I think in that table that we were just talking about, I think it was the Albert Shanker Institute that you cited, where low or high poverty communities were in New Hampshire spending $3,000 less per pupil than higher income communities. Yeah, and I wanted to get a sense, is that like in the 99th percent, are we 2 standard deviations away from where the rest of the country is on that? Or where is that fit? Because that seems like a pretty sizable average difference in spending.
Yeah, we will have to go look at the report. And if you look at the report, those figures are on page 9. But what I recall from the report is that they have states that have progressive funding first, then neutral funding, and then regressive funding. And my off the top of my head recollection is there might be 10 states with regressive funding. So, and Massachusetts, as I said, was progressive. So certainly, you know, on a statistical basis, Massachusetts and New Hampshire, it would be significant, their difference. But New Hampshire is not the only state that has per pupil funding for low poverty districts greater than high poverty districts.
Right, right. So that was the Shanker Institute study.
Yeah. But yeah, each report has its own methodology, and you know, my co-author knows it better than I do. But to me, when I put the 5 credible reports together and they gave the same, pretty much the same picture, to me that gave credibility.
The other figure I thought that was useful I mean, your figures on how dependent we are on property tax, those were pretty interesting. 5.5% of personal income. And that was in 2016. My guess is it's even higher where we did put it on 2020. Meaning that the tax rate's probably gone up more than our incomes in the low poverty, in the high poverty areas. But the other statistic there was 37% of our taxation in the state is derived from property tax. Would you just hit that one again? It was 37% of what?
The state and local revenue, 37%. And so the US average is 16%. So it's both state and local. And, you know, there's also federal aid for other states, sales taxes for other states, income taxes for other states, charges for other states. But if you look at that state by state property tax at a glance, let's see. We have those figures, but also a chart that looks only at sources of local general revenue. And that's instructive as well, because when you look at sources of local general revenue for New Hampshire compared to the United States, the first item shown is property tax, and whoa, New Hampshire is at 62% of local general revenue. US average 30%. Of course, New Hampshire local governments don't have sales or income taxes. And then another way that New Hampshire is odd is that local governments don't get as much from charges. 8% of local general revenue in the United States comes from charges, but the US average is 18%. So very interesting, different.
Thank you.
Any other, let's see. Great. Yeah, Chris.
You mentioned that your colleague feels differently than you do about using income as well as property value. And can you defend the colleague's position, because that using income seems like such an important thing, particularly in New Hampshire. What's the reason not to do that?
Well, as far as I could tell, and he's not here, he says that you should judge fiscal capacity based on the tax base you're actually able to tap. And so in New Hampshire, if you count income, well, New Hampshire, you don't have a local income tax. But my counter argument is that you do have some communities in New Hampshire that look property rich, like seacoast communities or like Lincoln. Lincoln looks property rich, but I think income poor. And so you pay your property tax out of your income. I think it gives you a better, more robust measure of fiscal capacity if you use both income and property. So we'll see who has that, who wins. When you have 4 co-authors.
And Dave, can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I noticed in the 2007 report that there was little difference in achievement when, no matter what the change had been in finance formulas. And I wonder if that still holds in your more recent results.
I don't know. There have been a lot more studies of the relationship between school finance and achievement. So yeah, I think you'll just have to stay tuned. And we'll do the hard work for you and try to read all those boring studies. So sorry, but yeah, I'll try to keep in touch with someone on the committee. And in fact, maybe I could get one of you to be commenters on the draft report. We usually take like 1.5 years to do one of these reports. And it's beneficial to me to get your feedback.
Bruce, is that something you could sort of work with Daphne on?
Yeah, I can certainly facilitate that. I can be the point person with Daphne.
Okay.
Be happy to.
That'd be great. Dick, you had a hand up.
Thank you. Well, part of this goes back to the discussion of the statewide property tax and the question that you raised about why that decline in the dollar amount of relief paid over all those years. I suggest a couple of additional considerations. One of them might have been mentioned, I might have missed it, but the assessed value that's eligible for the relief is capped at $100,000. And then the percentage of the tax on that $100,000 that's the relief that's granted declines also with income, or conversely goes up with income, so that the only family that gets 100% of 2% times 100,000, which is $200, is a family with income, let's see, between 12,500, well, less than 12,500. That family gets 100%. Then if your income is 12,500, but less than $15,000, you get 60% of that $200. And so it goes. So it's hardly worth it. You know, it's what it amounts to. That's a theory. I think it's hardly worth it in the eyes of many people. And then the second point is the structural nature of this tax and this relief program. They're separately administered. This was touched on. You've got the local municipality sending out the bill. And I believe there's something sent with the bill. I was just looking at my bill. I don't see it specifically delineated about this program. And then the taxpayer has to make an application, has to pay the bill, and has to make an application and eventually get a refund. They're separated in time and space. It's structurally designed to fail, I would say, particularly given the lack of incentive. So those are observations. You might want to comment on that. And I've got one other point that I'll get to.
Yeah, thank you for your reflections. And, you know, it occurs to me that one way that might get more applicants would be even to move the filing date, because not this year, but most years people have April 15 in mind and they're working on their taxes, right? And if they could file for this rebate around the time when they're completing their taxes, then it would be easier, right? And so even just moving the window a little bit could get more people to apply. Very simple.
Yeah.
Nick,
Okay,
you had a follow? Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. The other aspect of the statewide property tax as we know it today is that it provides for a retention of all the money locally. There's no return of the money above what's needed per the state's adequate education formula locally to the state. There's no provision for that return. So it stays locally. And we were talking about the possibility of a reduction in state aid. Well, how are we going to manage Rye or some of these other states that basically are making a profit off of the property tax in terms of its intent anyway? They are keeping substantial amounts of money locally. So they'd keep a little less if we went down that road. So I wonder if you could comment on what we could do, what you would like to see done about this donor town issue.
Yeah, the donor town issue is another debate among our authors. I have to say that my view is that, you know, different states across the United States have had something like donor towns. You probably know that Vermont had gold towns. In Texas, they called it Robin Hood. I think in Kansas, they had something else. But my general observation is that the donor town system, no matter how you call it, doesn't work because it's too much in people's face that you're taking from one, giving to the other. So personally, I've never been in favor of having donor towns. But I have another co-author who thinks that getting rid of donor towns made New Hampshire system less fair. So it's open for debate. I think, you know, one place where I have to do more studying on New Hampshire is rereading some of your court cases, because maybe that's the real, you know, line whether you like donor towns or don't like donor towns, you want a system that will be constitutional.
That's our goal.
Yes.
Thank you.
So Daphne, I've got a question that sort of, I don't know, it sort of dovetails on that last point and maybe some of fiscal capacity as well. But, you know, notwithstanding the part of, you know, the argument that where you might want to factor in income into fiscal capacity, I'm wondering how much of fiscal capacity might be, you know, affected by decisions that are made at the town level, whether that's zoning ordinances or something like that. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yes. So that might be another reason to take income into account too. Like one in our state-by-state property tax at a glance, one eye-popping thing about New Hampshire is the extensive use of current use assessment that, according to the most recent information we had, over half of the land area in the state is enrolled in current use. Wow. You know, so that could affect your tax base and make it less, a less good measure of fiscal capacity right there. But yeah, Mr. Leno, zoning, you know, there could be lots of things that could affect tax base as well. But, you know, to me, the current use, I was amazed.
Are there any reports that really, you know, focus in on those sort of local differences and whether it's tax base impact through current use, through you know, government held property? I mean, New Hampshire, I think a big chunk of the property here in Hopkinton is part of the Merrimack Flood Control Compact, which basically prevents Massachusetts from flooding when there's big rainstorms. So, you know, are there any sort of extensive studies on, you know, on this and, you know, sort of disparities that might exist?
You know, we have looked at it in different states, but it typically, if you have a database, it would be like the DRA would have it. You know, we just finished a big study of South Carolina's property tax system that's going to be released soon. And there we looked at data on exempt property by town. And the best thing we could find was someone's dissertation of like 7 years ago. So it really varies state by state. But yeah, government held property, nonprofits, you know, all of that would be important. And who was the person who used to, John Beardmore might know whether DRA has good town by town information on the property tax base and how much is exempt by town in New Hampshire.
Suppose I should know that. I think the answer is yes. I know local governments don't have to value their tax exempt property regularly like they do with taxable property every 5 years, but I believe DRA has record of how much tax exempt property is out there, but it might not be by value, it might be by acreage.
Okay.
I remember when I was there, I had somebody from a seacoast town that had a lot of tax exempt property say, geez, you know, you're burdening us by making us value this every year. And I looked into it and I said, there's nothing that says you have to value it every year, but you might want to keep valuing it because it's, you know, it's good for your taxpayers to know kind of how that tax liability is apportioned. But you, Dr. Kenny, you bring up a really interesting point about current use, which is a rabbit hole we could go down for eternity. But as far as the administration of property tax in this state, it's a really, really important variable. Both how much is in current use and then what the penalty is I do recall there was a brief proposal to increase the penalty. Penalty is not a great word, but it's the fee you pay when you take the land out of current use. During the financial crisis 10 years ago, there was a brief proposal. I remember being in Senate Finance when it came up to increase the penalty rate as a revenue raiser. And holy cow, was there a quick outcry from landowners who own that land. But there are people across the state who have very strong opinions about the current use program, particularly up in the more rural towns out west and up north, and folks who believe that it unfairly, handicaps their ability to function. But we could talk endlessly about that.
I think you're not going to fix current use, but for me, the bottom line is if you're going to measure fiscal capacity to the extent you have current use, tax exempt property and all that, it's a greater argument for having both income and property as a measure.
Okay. Another question along those same lines too, Daphne, when it comes to looking at property, let's say, property assessed in Claremont and a property assessed in Portsmouth, let's say it's a $700,000 home in Portsmouth and it's a $200,000 home in Claremont. Is the $200,000 assessment in Claremont pretty close to fair market value, and the $700,000 assessment in Portsmouth pretty close to fair market value? I mean, can you compare these things as, well, this is a $700,000 piece of property, this is a $200,000 piece of property?
As I said, I think New Hampshire does a pretty good job, but I think what I'm going to do is, on this particular question, I'll reach out to one of our fellows who used to be chief assessor for the city of Boston, who now lives in New Hampshire. I bet that he has some observation on that. And so your key question is, do you think that that assessment by towns across New Hampshire is pretty close to 100% of market value?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that I think we're gonna be digging into some more on the commission, whether we do it through the fiscal policy work group or do it on the full commission. But we sort of started down that road a little bit with the DRA a few weeks ago. And we didn't really get to these questions, but I know the state of New Hampshire has really made a significant investment over the last, 8 to 10 years in systems to provide more comparable or 100% valuation systems, more standardized assessment practices, and the ability to compare properties from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. And be able to compare them on an equal, basis. And I think we've talked a little bit about, was this something that was developed when you were there, John, the Mosaic system?
My predecessor, kicked off that project. I can't take credit for it, but yeah, it was released while I was there. What it really did was automate and streamline the practice of equalization as it was always conducted, which is using actual sales in a jurisdiction to compare to assessments, and then compare across jurisdictions to equalize, so that when state property and county property taxes are apportioned across the member communities, that it's done so fairly. I'm totally biased, but I think it's done really well in New Hampshire. There is criticism that in certain jurisdictions you have so few sales that it becomes cumbersome. I think that's accurate, but I'm not sure how to solve it. But yeah, revenue spent a lot of money on that. It was a capital budget project in the early 2010s, I believe, and it's all been spent. And it's a pretty robust system.
Great. Thanks, John. Any other questions on what we've been talking about today? I don't see any hands on the.
John's got one more question or comment.
Oh, John, yeah.
Thanks. I know you've heard too much from me already today, but
No, that's never.
one quick question. Something I've kind of been thinking about and I've brought up in this commission several times is New Hampshire's unlimited property tax ability in local government, where property taxes as levied by school districts, by counties, by even village districts and basically water districts are unlimited as to rate and unlimited as to amount, and how, I want to say most, but I haven't looked at all 50 states, but you might know this, Dr. Kenyon, but as you look across the country, it's fairly uncommon, as I understand it, to have, really up to 4 government jurisdictions annually levying unlimited property tax rates. And I could rattle off dozens that do it a little bit differently and limit growth and therefore taxpayer liability year over year to either some higher voter threshold approval, or I know Illinois does it on a CPI basis. Have you thought about how, that property tax regime that we have in New Hampshire sort of is a good thing or could be changed to the benefit of progressivity in the property tax or that kind of thing? I don't have a real pointed question, but just sort of wondering about your thoughts on.
You are right that New Hampshire is unusual in not having any statewide limit. And I think like only 3 states.
Connecticut's one of them.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I have to look it up for you, but yeah, I think there's maybe only 3 states in the country that don't have some kind of property tax limit. So maybe I should actually put that as one of the main findings about New Hampshire. But we have a report in process that's already at first draft stage about forms of property tax relief. And so what I should tell you is that some kinds of limits are better than others. Like Massachusetts Prop 2.5 is not a bad limit, except for a few towns that can't seem to pass an override. But on the other hand, like Prop 13 or Tabor and Gallagher in Colorado or Measure 5 in Oregon, there are measures that just totally mess up your system.
They're awful. Colorado's awful.
Completely non-transparent. And, this bottom line of this report that's in draft is that assessment limits are absolutely the worst. But rate limits or levy limits, so limits, limit rates, levy limits, limit amount, if they're not too draconian, they're not as bad. Of course, anytime you put a limit, then you take away from local control. And I think, doesn't Manchester have a limit? And Nashua, do they have a limit?
Yes.
So those voters decided, yeah, we want a limit, but the state didn't impose it.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions, Jay? Was that a stretch or was that a question? I think that was a stretch.
I know Jay did ask earlier, Daphne, when will the report that you summarized today be available and completed, do you think?
Well, we're aiming for first draft end of September, and we're aiming for the thing to be published end of June in 2021. But yeah, I will keep in touch, and I'm looking for some feedback, and I already got some. I definitely got my money's worth today. Thank you so much.
Well, if we can get access to the first draft, we'll return the favor in kind.
That would be great.
Okay.
Daphne, we got our money's worth today too, for sure. Many, many, many times over. So, so we want to thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Yes.
Well, thank you so much. I will let you get on with your work. Thanks for all your time. I'll be in.
Great. We'll talk with you soon. Take care.
Bye.
So, great presentation, great discussion. That could have gone on for a lot longer. Just the same way it seems like a lot of our meetings can go. And of course, we blew through another agenda point at 3:15. We wanted to review the AIR brief on the national review of basically funding formulas, and I hope everybody got a chance to see that. I don't know, Bruce, do we want to take like 5 minutes to, or?
Let me suggest this, Dave. Now that we, and we didn't know this earlier, now that we know that next Monday's full commission meeting will also be entirely conversation, no presentations. Let's rather than doing something too cursory in just even addressing the most recent AIR brief, let's bundle that together. We'll give people guidance, maybe send some focus questions for people to think about as they review all of those briefs. The other topic that was potentially on the agenda today was any reflections on the 2006 Federal Reserve report that was just at that time a kind of an historical analysis of where things stood. Conditions have changed a lot, of course, since 2006. And I'll simply say that as I go back and look at that Federal Reserve report in 2006, it adds to the notion, for me personally, speaking just for myself, that this commission is trying to address what's become kind of a layering, kind of a, almost like a riverbank layering of prior efforts to address the school funding challenge that in some ways have made our work even more difficult. That is, there are structural challenges that were even described today in this presentation about the relationship between local income, for example, and local property wealth that to some extent we have to undo in order to arrive at some long-term solutions. So I would just call, as an historical artifact, that Federal Reserve report in 2006 has value, but it doesn't point to any solutions, and it is a bit outdated because there have been changes, obviously, in things like the statewide education tax since then. So let's hold for those deliberations. And given the time that we have now, let's have brief work group updates from the 3 work groups, just to check in, so that we have time for a few public comments.
That'd be great. Mel, do you want to start off with that, since I think you've got the most recent stuff?
Well, we issued around the 1st our school employee survey, and the deadline for that to be completed is the 10th. And as of at least this morning, we've had almost 1,000 employees respond to that survey, which I think is significant. We asked the various groups, the principals, administrators, the respective 2 unions, to make that available, and obviously it has. My goal, actually, as we were looking at this, was 1,000 people, and my sense is by the time the deadline's there, we will hit that 1,000. We're also in the process of compiling the response from the focus groups that we had in June, and we'll be able to report that to the group probably when we meet next week. The next we have to look at is obviously the compilation of the survey I just mentioned, and then we are in the process of assessing what questions that we need to have on the UNH survey that will go out in September. And we hope that some of the work groups will give us some of the substance for those questions. We have a spot for 10 questions to go on that survey that goes out across the state through UNH's survey center. And further, we're also beginning to look at how we're going to gain access to have feedback on some of the substances, some of the substantive recommendations that we will be considering as we get into the fall to have focus groups, and not necessarily focus groups, but a way for people to give us feedback on that. So that's kind of where we're going right now, David.
Okay, great. Anybody have any questions for Mel on that? A lot of activity going on with public engagement right now.
Brief expansion on a couple of things there. Carrie can add to this as well if she'd like, or Michelle. But referring back to those public comment hours that we're setting up starting in July, August, and then more frequently in the fall, we do want to dedicate a couple of those sessions probably to just making them available to students, either current students in the New Hampshire schools, or perhaps graduates from the past year who have a perspective on their educational experience. So we're looking for a variety of ways to be sure that we hear from students, because they're the ultimate, people impacted by the decisions that this commission makes, as well as taxpayers, of course. And I want to shout out, our partnership with Reaching Higher here, as well as we work with them to both inform students about how schools are funded in our state, and then to get their input as well. So they've been great partners in helping us begin to gather, particularly in the fall, student perspective as well. So that's just wanted to add to that for the engagement work group.
Anybody with any questions for Mel or Bruce on, or Carrie, anything to add on that?
No, I think Mel and Bruce covered it all. I concur.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. Jay, you want to talk about adequacy? I think you're muted.
Oh, yeah, adequacy and disparities. All right, so we've got a lot of loose ends that we're going to need to start to pull together. Bruce and I are going to get together on Thursday to try to tighten up an agenda that we'll get out over the weekend. And I think we've got 2 meetings next week, right, Bruce?
Full commission on Monday, work groups next Thursday.
Mm-hmm. So, and then another one, the work group the following Monday?
No, we have a series of full commission meetings on Mondays going forward.
All right, thanks.
Next work group meetings are the 16th of July.
All right, so some of the things we've got to pull together, we're going to have a presentation on building aid at the next meeting. I highlight that because some of our other presentations have been parts of education funding that are not a part of adequacy definitions. And we've eventually got to begin to catalog these portions of state assistance that are outside of adequacy aid. Or we've got to decide that the adequacy definition needs to begin to address some things like pre-K, special ed, and building aid, and career technical education. In any case, we've got to sort this out, and that'll be a committee conversation. Relative to the cost of adequacy, we need to determine, and I distributed earlier, and if the basis of the Conval $9,929 adequacy cost, which sets up a second cost point for us, and we need to determine, between 3,709 and 9,929, and the average cost. Bill, you keep using 19,000, somewhere in there, right? Do we need more cost points in order for our work to be complete relative to the cost of education? another question I'm posing, but it's one that we need to answer so that we can continue forward. Iris, on disparity aid, whoop, lost her, but maybe she's still listening. The portions of base adequacy, or I'm sorry, the adequacy aid formula that have been reduced in their impact since the 2008 report, I think we want to revisit the proportionality of those disparity aid categories and how they've been minimized over time by having been frozen and not adjusted. So I think if you can help us through that kind of conversation, I think that too will help us get to some of the points that we just were talking about with the Lincoln Institute, with Daphne. So I think I can stop there, David.
Okay.
And with, you know, you can see we're midstream on a number of topics that are important, but we're running out of time till September and we're going to have to sort through and make some choices.
Great, thanks, Jay. And I'll be real brief so that we can get into public comment. But fiscal policy actually last met on June 15th, and I think we actually did report out at one of our last full commission meetings. But basically, at our last meeting, we went through the Shaheen what we're referring to as the Shaheen 2000 report on revenue options, and identified really key principles and talked about what those are. And briefly, they are distributional equity, stability, and adequacy of revenue sources, competitiveness or anti-competitiveness of revenue sources, exportability, simplicity, and tax neutrality. And I think there was some comment during that discussion that these are in fact the 6 common criteria when evaluating different taxes or revenue sources. So you know, as we are on basically the second 5 months of this commission's work, the fiscal policy group, which will meet next week, we're going to begin sort of talking about how to go about modeling different revenue options. And it's not to say that it's a recommendation to do this or a recommendation to do that, but who should we engage and who should we ask to help us put together different revenue packages in what amounts, because we don't know what adequacy is going to come back with, but just so that we can start to sort of lay the groundwork, so that as we get into the final approach of this commission's work, and the various pieces start coming together from public engagement, from adequacy and fiscal policy, we can start to really sort of integrate the work of those 3 groups to put together either final policy proposals, possibilities, recommendations, whatever it's going to be that this commission is going to finally put out in its final report. But like I've said from the beginning, I do hope that what the work we do is going to be useful and informative to all policymakers, including the governor's office, the Senate, and the House. So I think we've taken a thoughtful approach, through this to not only take a really careful look at what's in front of us, but build on what's been done in the past, whether it's the Shaheen 2000 work, whether it's the Fed 2006 work, whether it's the Estabrook 2008 work, and really build on what we've done in the past, and hopefully be able to help address the issues that our cities and towns are facing across the state. So That's all I got on fiscal policy. Would it be a good time to open up the floor to public comment, Bruce?
Yeah, I think so. Before we do that, any other parting thoughts
Yeah.
or reflections from today's commission meeting? Then in that case, let's do that. And I think Jordan will help manage the process there.
Okay, great. So, so Jordan, I think most people are on using Zoom, and I think they can put their hand up. Can they do that, Jordan?
They should be able to, yes.
And if you're calling in, it is what, star, or
It's star 9.
Star-
Always.
it's either star 9 or 9 star, something like that. So, sorry to not be crisp on that. I'm not seeing any hands up at the moment.
Oh, Liz has a hand.
All right, great. Now we've got one. So can you, great.
Hi there, are you able to
Liz,
hear me?
you're on.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me this time today. My name is Elizabeth Canada, and I'm the Interim Deputy Director at Reaching Higher, New Hampshire. Reaching Higher is a nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit based in Concord, founded in 2015. We serve as a public education and community engagement resource. I wanted to preview for you some new research that we have related to teacher salary schedules in New Hampshire districts. As you know, the vast majority of school districts in New Hampshire pay teachers based on a step salary schedule, with each step representing 1 year of experience. Under a step salary schedule, districts pay teachers based on years of experience and level of education. Schedules include varying higher education levels, which may include bachelor's degree, BA plus 15, which means a bachelor's plus 15 graduate credits, master's degree, and so on. Salary schedules are negotiated at the district level. In our research, Reaching Higher is focusing on 2 parts of the salary schedules, for teachers with a bachelor's degree only and for teachers with a master's degree only. This is for a few reasons. The first is that these 2 categories are consistent across the 138 districts that use salary schedules. The second is because of the school funding formula. In 2008, lawmakers identified the standard teacher salary as $35,548 in the school funding formula, which was the average salary for a certified teacher with a bachelor's degree and 3 years of teaching experience. So we were interested to look closely at what was offered in districts statewide in 2018-2019, that school year, which was just pretty recent. I want to offer just a few of our key takeaways since this is public comment. And I will say that salary offerings across the state vary widely. So the first one, the median starting salary for first-year teachers with a bachelor's degree was $38,216 in the 2019 school year. The median salary for third-year teachers, going back to the funding formula, was $40,009. First-year teachers earned 57% more in the highest paying district in the state. And by the 5th year, the difference grew to 65%, even with the same teaching experience and education. The 5th year salary in the single lowest paying district was $14,246 less than the first year salary in the single highest paying district. In 4 New Hampshire school districts, 5th year teachers did not make as much as first year teachers did in 64 New Hampshire school districts. And finally, in 24 districts, there was no step available in which teachers with a bachelor's degree could make $50,000. We've also looked at geographical differences. We see that the higher paying districts tend to be clustered on the Seacoast and the Upper Valley, but the lower paying districts are varied throughout the state. In terms of information we are finalizing for publication, we're looking at correlations of salary schedules against student outcomes and socioeconomic variables. When I say student outcomes, I mean graduation rates, test scores. For socioeconomic variables, we're looking at free reduced lunch population, median household income. We are also looking at teacher educational attainment, as published by the Department of Education, against student outcomes and socioeconomic variables. So I'll follow up after this meeting to ask Chairman Luneau, perhaps if we can share this information more formally, the more extensive information in its entirety in one of your meetings over the next few weeks, if that's possible. I understand that you all have very packed schedules and you have a lot of discussion to do as you shared today. But I wanted to share some of what we have with you today to get that conversation started. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Liz. Yeah, I'll talk with Bruce and Jay about this too, because whether it's on a commission or work group, whatever the most effective way that makes sense to present that information, and so that can be factored into the work, that would be great. So let's see, any other hands up, Jordan? And it is *9 if you're dialing into to this meeting, to this webinar. You see any hands, Jordan?
I do not know.
Hey, then I think we're 3 minutes ahead of schedule, Bruce. How about that? Oh, I see Dick Ames has his hand up, so we're going to blow that.
The last 3 minutes here.
Yeah.
Sorry, you wouldn't want to waste 3 minutes. So getting back, I guess, to what Jay was talking about in terms of working on adequacy, the cost of adequacy, it left me wondering at what juncture we start getting from AIR the modeling of costs as part of a formula that we will be relating to and responding to. At what time do we start moving into AIR's work? They're doing terrific work on policy briefs, but the next step, as I understand it, is that they're going to assist us in developing the cost of adequacy.
Yeah, so it's a good thing Drew joined us, even though we didn't get a chance to discuss the most recent briefs today. AIR has given us a lot of great appetizers. Dick wants the entree. So Drew, why don't you share with them what this, when we discussed, our teams discussed recently, this idea of at least a memo anticipating the so-called deliverable 3 as you work towards the cost modeling. So Drew.
Tammy's with us today too.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're still working on some data collection issues. So we have a call with the Department of Education tomorrow to try and get some of those issues hammered away with regard to a data sharing agreement and allowing us to get some of the unsuppressed data that's posted to their website but has some cells missing for small cell sizes. When there's too few students, they don't want to release certain pieces of information. So we're working on getting that. But we do have some stuff that we're working on with respect to with using national data and the publicly available data that is on the department's website. So I mean, I think we're hoping to have a memo, as Bruce talked about, later this month that will outline the analyses that we have worked on and that we're able to work on, and we'll go from there. But yeah, we'll have a better idea once we get the data finalized.
I just say, out of fairness to AIR, it's been we've been going back and forth about 10 days or a little more with DOE to release what's referred to as suppressed data, which we all understand because of the very small size of some of our school districts, protecting the anonymity of special education students and ELL learners can be a challenge when we assign costs to the education of specific students in very small districts. And that's been part of the challenge, and it's not no fault of theirs at all, but it does push out their ability to do run the kinds of modeling that we're all looking for a bit. We're hoping that this will get resolved tomorrow or very quickly after tomorrow.
Yeah. I think it will be. I was on a phone call earlier today with the department, with their legal team, and and I think we're all on the same page in understanding the importance of this data in terms of developing accurate funding models for school districts, but also we're all on the same page with respect to protecting the privacy of our students and families. I mean, these are all of our constituents, and also the importance of the transparency of this process, because we've got to have a good faith in understanding how a funding algorithm is developed. So I think I know we'll be able to navigate this challenge, and that we've got the full cooperation from the department to do it. So anyway, we'll have that very soon. Thanks for bringing that up, Dick.
Yeah.
Anything else? Now that we're a couple minutes beyond time. Corinne? Yeah.
Thanks. Really short, just made this observation in Dr. Kenyon's report, where the equity in school aid was either a regressive or was an F for the 48th in the nation. But then further into the documents, it identifies that New Hampshire also had the highest number of court rulings, which was 11. So it makes me think, compared to the other states in the course, it's like, well, can we make some decisions to move forward to start decreasing the number of times that people have to file court injunctions against school funding? So just saw that correlation. It still doesn't proceed
Yeah,
in terms of making equity any better.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, can I just comment quickly? Corinne, I think you're right. One of the reasons we may have the most failing equity in our student aid formula is that a bunch of people believe that the court said you've got to give wealthy districts the same amount of adequacy aid per pupil as the poor districts. So in fact, stopping the court from allegedly perpetrating this unfair constraint, educating the court on that may be a goal of this commission. Thank you.
Great. All right. I'm not going to ask anybody for any more feedback. Not now. So I want to thank everybody for joining us during what is otherwise a very big week, and I hope everybody is enjoying time with family and enjoys some really nice weather. We're going to get out for a hike next. I hope everybody else enjoys the outdoors. So thank you all. Oh, do we have anything else to do? No, we're done. Great. Thanks all. Be well. Talk soon.
Take care, everybody.